There is a reason you feel like an outsider. A reason you walk into rooms and feel the air shift. A reason people either gravitate toward you or silently resent you without you ever saying a word. It's not because you're arrogant. It's not because you're difficult. It's not because you think you're better than them. It's because they know. They know you are different. They know your mind is sharp, your perception is deep, your awareness is beyond what they can comprehend. And that terrifies them. Because in a world where most people have settled for mediocrity, you are a living reminder of what they could have been, if only they had tried harder. And instead of rising to meet you, instead of sharpening themselves, instead of pushing their limits, they choose the easy way out. They hate you for it. They don't hate you because you're difficult. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They don't hate you because you think differently. They hate you because you are everything they chose not to become. You are proof that intelligence is still alive. That wisdom is still valuable. That deep thinking is not extinct. And every time they look at you, every time they hear you speak, every time they feel your presence in a room, they are forced to acknowledge their own mediocrity. And instead of growing, instead of evolving, instead of sharpening themselves to meet your level, they choose to resent you instead. But that is their burden to carry, not yours. You will never fit in with them. And you were never meant to. Fire, type this in the comments. They fear my wisdom. Fire, Sparkles, stay until the end, don't miss out. Hit like, subscribe to Bible Peak for life-changing truths. Sparkles, a sharp blade doesn't cut because it wants to. It cuts because that is its nature. And when you walk into a space, your very presence exposes the dullness around you. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to prove anything. Your intelligence, your perception, your wisdom, it all speaks without speaking. And that's exactly why they hate you. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because standing next to you makes them feel their own dullness. You see, people don't despise intelligence itself. They despise the reminder that they could have been more than what they are, but chose not to be. And you? You are that reminder. The world is in decline. IQ levels are dropping. People are more distracted than ever. And in the midst of all of this, you stand firm, unshaken, unbothered by the nonsense. While they waste their energy on trivialities, you are thinking on a higher plane. While they are preoccupied with gossip, drama, and fleeting entertainment, you are consuming knowledge, growing, and refining yourself. And the truth is, that kind of self-discipline and clarity of mind is rare. So rare that when people encounter it, they don't know what to do with it. They expect you to be like them, to talk like them, to lower yourself to fit in. But you won't. And that makes them furious. Because your very existence challenges their way of life. ###2. They want you to dim your light to make them feel comfortable. Weak people hate strength. Mediocre people hate excellence. And the mentally lazy hate those who think deeply. Not because you are wrong. Not because you are arrogant. But because your very presence makes them uncomfortable in their own mediocrity. They expect you to soften yourself, to dull your edges, to suppress your intelligence so they don't feel so small. They want you to dumb yourself down just enough to fit in. But why should you? Why should a lion pretend to be a house cat just because the mice in the room are afraid? Why should you apologize for your wisdom, intelligence, and depth just to make people who refuse to think for themselves feel comfortable? The answer is simple: you shouldn't. You were never meant to fit in. You were never meant to conform. You were never meant to shrink yourself for the sake of people who will never respect you anyway. Because let's be honest, they don't want you to be less intelligent for your benefit. They want it for theirs. They want to feel superior. They want to feel dominant. They want to feel like they have something over you. But when you refuse to lower yourself, when you stand in your full power, when you own your intelligence unapologetically, they can't take it. They hate that they can't compete. They hate that they can't control you. They hate that no matter how much they dismiss you, mock you, or ignore you, they still feel small in your presence. And that is why they want you to dim your light. Have you ever noticed how shallow most conversations are? Small talk, gossip, discussions about nothing. Most people don't talk because they have something to say. They talk because they're terrified of silence. Because silence forces them to think. And thinking? That's something they haven't done in a long time. But you? You don't waste your breath on nonsense. You don't participate in empty conversations just to fill space. You don't feel the need to chase social validation through pointless chatter. And that angers them. Because in their world, silence is uncomfortable. But in your world, silence is power. They see you sitting there, listening, observing, processing, and it unnerves them. Because they can tell, you are not fooled by their illusions. You are watching. You are analyzing. You are seeing through the games they play. And that realization, it makes them resent you. Because they cannot manipulate someone who sees through the game. You don't have to do anything to offend them. You don't have to boast. You don't have to flaunt your intelligence. You don't have to make them feel small. Your existence alone is enough to make them uncomfortable. Because when you walk into a room, when you speak, when you think at a level they cannot reach, it reminds them of their own limitations. And instead of growing, instead of learning, instead of elevating themselves, they would rather dim your light. Weak people hate strength. The uninspired hate ambition. And the intellectually lazy despise those who think deeply. Not because you are wrong. Not because you are arrogant. But because you are a constant reminder of their own wasted potential. You don't even have to say a word. Your presence alone forces them to compare themselves to you. They see your sharp mind. They see your wisdom. They see the way you question things they blindly accept. And it makes them feel small. So what do? They try to make you feel like the problem. They will say you are too much. That you are too deep. That you are too serious. Not because it's true, but because they want you to shrink yourself to their level. They will pressure you to simplify your thoughts, to hold back your insights, to make yourself more digestible for their limited understanding. Because when they don't understand you, they feel excluded. And when they feel excluded, they get angry. But tell me, why should a lion pretend to be a house cat just because the mice feel intimidated? Why should an eagle clip its wings just because pigeons are afraid of heights? Why should you dumb yourself down just because others refuse to level up? You see, they don't want you to fit in. They want you to fit inside the small box they have built for themselves. Because if you don't, they will be forced to admit that they have settled for less than they are capable of. And that truth, that is too much for them to handle. Look around you. Look at what society has become. Distractions everywhere. Shallow conversations. Mindless entertainment. Most people don't talk because they have something important to say. They talk because they fear silence. Because silence forces them to think, and thinking, that is too much effort. That is too uncomfortable. That is too dangerous, because it might make them question everything they've been conditioned to believe. But you are different. You don't waste your breath on nonsense. You don't engage in empty words just to fill the void. You don't seek comfort in mindless chatter. You value depth. You value truth. You value substance over noise. And that is why they hate you. Because they don't want to think. They don't want to face reality. They don't want to challenge their own beliefs. So when you don't play along, when you refuse to participate in their meaningless exchanges, they take it personally. They say you are antisocial. They say you are too intense. They say you think you're better than everyone else. Not because these things are true, but because they cannot stand the way you refuse to validate their illusions. They need constant noise to distract themselves from their own emptiness. But you embrace the silence. Because in silence, there is power. In silence, there is clarity. In silence, you hear what most people are too afraid to listen to. And when you sit there, listening, observing, processing, they feel exposed. Because they can sense that you are seeing things they cannot see, that you are reading between the lines, that you are seeing through the facade they present to the world, and that terrifies them. Because they have built their entire lives on pretending, and you see right through the act. So instead of facing themselves, instead of asking, why do I feel so uncomfortable around this person? They choose the easy path. They project their discomfort onto you. They tell themselves, it's not me, it's them. And so, they mock you, they dismiss you, they resent you, because the alternative, the idea that they might actually be wrong, that they might be living a lie, that they might be mentally asleep, is too much for them to bear. But that is their burden, not yours. You do not owe them comfort. You do not owe them conformity. You do not owe them an explanation for why you refuse to engage in their illusions. You were not born to blend in with them. You were born to rise above them. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They hate you because you're right. They hate you because your intelligence, your discipline, your refusal to conform, all of it forces them to confront the truth they've been running from their entire lives. And the truth, it's ugly. It tells them that they could have been better. They could have worked harder. They could have used their minds instead of blindly following the crowd. But instead of growing, instead of evolving, instead of doing the hard work of thinking for themselves, they do what weak people always do. They attack the messenger. You've heard it before. You think you're better than everyone else. You're too serious. You're difficult to talk to. But what they really mean is, why won't you lower yourself to my level so I can feel comfortable? They don't want conversation. They want validation. They don't want challenges. They want agreement, even if what they're saying is ridiculous. And when you ask for evidence, when you push them to think deeper, when you expose the flaws in their logic, they panic. They realize they have nothing to back up their words. They realize they've spent their lives parroting what others say without ever questioning it. And instead of admitting it, instead of saying, you're right, I never really thought about it like that, they lash out. They attack you personally, because they can't win the argument, because they can't outthink you, because they know, deep down, you are making a point they cannot refute. So they do the only thing left. They call you arrogant. They call you condescending. They call you too much. Not because you actually are any of these things, but because they need an excuse to dismiss what you're saying. They need a reason to ignore the truth. And if they can convince themselves that you're the problem, that your intelligence is just ego, that your confidence is just arrogance, then they can continue living in denial. Because facing the truth, that would require change, and change is hard. Society is built on emotional manipulation. People are expected to follow certain unspoken rules, nod and smile, even when you disagree, agree with the majority, even when they're clearly wrong, play along, even when you know the whole thing is a joke. But you don't follow those rules. You see through the act, and that makes you dangerous. Because they can't control you, they can't pressure you into false politeness, they can't guilt trip you into agreeing, they can't make you feel bad for standing your ground, and that infuriates them. Because most people are easy to manipulate, all it takes is a little social pressure, a little fear of being different, a little guilt tripping, and they fall right in line. But when they try those tactics on you, they fail, because you have trained your mind to think independently, because you don't base your decisions on emotions, but on logic and truth, and because of that, they hate you, not because you're wrong, but because they are powerless against you. You don't just expose their lack of intelligence, you expose their wasted potential. They look at you, and they realize they could have been sharper, they could have learned more, they could have used their time wisely instead of wasting it on distractions, but they didn't. They chose comfort over challenge. They chose mindless entertainment over self-improvement, and every time they see you, every time they hear you speak, every time they witness your success, they are reminded of the choices they failed to make. That's why they hate you, not because you're too smart, not because you're too intense, not because you think you know everything, but because you prove that they could have been great, but they chose not to be, and instead of fixing it, instead of working on themselves, instead of taking responsibility for their own mental laziness, they blame you, because that's easier. Hating you is easier than hating themselves. Mocking you is easier than admitting they failed. Resenting you is easier than putting in the work to change, so they attack, they gossip, they dismiss you as too much. Not because it's true, but because you force them to see the truth about themselves, and they can't handle it. They don't seek truth, they seek confirmation, a safe echo chamber where they are never challenged, never questioned, never forced to face the limits of their own thinking. And you are the one thing they cannot control, the one force that refuses to play along. The one person who won't nod in agreement just to make them feel secure in their own ignorance. And that makes you the biggest threat to their existence. Most people don't want to grow. They don't want to evolve. They don't want to think critically about the world around them, because growth is uncomfortable, and thinking, that requires effort. So instead of seeking truth, they surround themselves with people who tell them exactly what they want to hear. They build a mental fortress, a safe space where no one dares to challenge their beliefs, where no one questions their perspective, where no one forces them to confront the flaws in their thinking. And then you show up, with your sharp mind, with your refusal to accept easy answers, with your ability to see through the illusions they've built their lives around, and suddenly, that fortress starts to crumble. Not because you attacked them, not because you insulted them, not because you even tried to change them, but because your mere presence, your ability to think for yourself, is a reminder that their entire world is built on a foundation of lies. And the worst part, deep down, they know it. That's why they get so defensive. That's why they lash out when you speak. That's why they take it personally when you ask simple questions. Not because you're being rude, not because you're being aggressive, but because your words, your thoughts, your very existence, threatens the fragile mental reality they have created for themselves. You didn't attack them, but in their eyes, you did something far worse. You made them think, this world is not built for people like you. It is built for conformity. It is built for obedience. It is built for people who follow, not people who lead. And when you refuse to lower yourself, when you refuse to pretend to be less than what you are, when you refuse to play by the unspoken social rules, they see it as an attack, not because you are trying to offend them, but because they realize they have spent their entire lives accepting a lie. They want you to act like them, to talk like them, to blend in, because if you do, then they can justify their own existence. If you accept mediocrity, then they don't have to feel bad for doing the same. If you lower yourself, then they don't have to rise higher. But when you refuse, when you stand firm in your intelligence, in your independence, in your refusal to conform, they feel it as a personal rejection, because it forces them to confront a terrifying truth, that they could have been more, that they could have learned more, that they could have broken free from the mental prison they now live in. But they didn't. And instead of fixing that, instead of improving themselves, instead of putting in the work, they take the easy way out. They label you as the problem. They call you difficult. They call you arrogant. They call you out of touch. Because as long as you are the problem, They don't have to face themselves. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They don't hate you because you're flawed. They don't hate you because you think differently. They hate you because you proved that they could have been better, but they chose not to be. Every time they see you, every time they hear you speak, every time they are reminded of your intelligence, your independence, your refusal to conform, they feel something inside of them break. Because they know that if they had put in the effort, if they had dared to think differently, if they had chosen growth over comfort, they could have been standing beside you, instead of standing against you, but they didn't. And now, the only way they can make peace with that choice is to hate you for making a different one. But you do not exist to make them feel comfortable. You do not exist to fit inside their tiny world. You do not exist to make yourself smaller just so they can feel bigger. You were not born to belong to them. You were born to rise above them.